Our second session is on gender in the Neo-Assyrian world. I'm very pleased to introduce Amy Gansell from St. John's University in New York with Images Divinely Sanctioned, Neo-Assyrian Queenship at Nimrud's Northwest Palace.
Hello, thank you everybody, and thank you for having the third meeting of this workshop. I've been involved since the first one, and I feel that we've all grown individually and collectively as we're trying to push the boundaries of these topics. So, the topic of images of Neo-Assyrian queens can certainly feel like it's already been thoroughly treated by, for example, Julian Reed, Tali Orman, and most recently, Natalie May. Most of the studied imagery dates to the 8th to 7th century BC reigns of Sennacherib through Ashurbanipal. However, I would like to turn our attention to the imagery on some under-considered 9th to 8th century seals excavated from Nimrud's Northwest Palace. Fundamental to this process of looking for and at images of queens and queenship, we must attempt to establish what is and is not a figure of a queen. But first I will clarify my language. My paper will encourage us to move beyond the identification of individual figures as queens and turn to a consideration of the visual representation of queenship as a divinely sanctioned royal office embodied in a succession of mortal women. In the examples shown here, we recognize the figures as queens based on the iconography of the crown of city walls, the mural crown. Another iconographic clue to Labali Sharat's status as queen is her seated, enthroned position. Is there a pointer? A pointer. So by now you've all found the chair back. There you go. The inscription on the stele confirms this iconography by stating that we're observing the image, the Salmu, in Akkadian, of Queen Labali Sharat. Thus, the stele represents an individual queen and exemplifies the office of queenship. Discussing images of queenship, I will therefore use the word queen to refer to the figure depicted with the understanding that the figure could signal an individual and/or the office of queenship. In contrast, more generic, uninscribed glyphic images portraying queen figures might have exclusively denoted queenship. In these, the queen or royal couple is depicted before a great god. This 8th century gold seal from Tomb 3 at Nimrud identifies the queen, Hama, as its owner. That's based on an inscription on the seal, on the rim of it, and along with the seal in the tomb was also found this floral headdress. The cuneiform inscription reads, belonging to Hama, queen of Shalmaneser. The seal's surface portrays a goddess, probably an Ishtar-Melissu syncretism, enthroned upon a beast. Behind the goddess is a scorpion, a well-documented emblem of the queen, or queenship. The female figure wears a belted short-sleeved dress with an ankle-length skirt. Her features, body, dress, and hairstyle fulfill non-gendered figural standards for Assyrian art. Her beardlessness communicates her non-male status. As a mark of her office, she wears a diadem with a dorsal ribbon. The only other figures in Assyrian art to wear this headdress are, as you see here, the king and the crown prince, both of whom are bearded. Although the pictured intact diadem was found with other queens in Tomb 2 at Nimrud, its presence in the queen's tombs confirms it as a female headdress. Hama's tomb actually preserves some loose components belonging to this sort of diadem, suggesting that the bands of her diadem may have been made of perishable material. Here then, it is the diadem on the figure, in conjunction with the inscription and the scorpion, that tell us the queen, not a woman of other rank or a eunuch, is depicted. By the inscription naming Queen Hama is not part of the image field and would not have been replicated in impressions. The uninscribed image, therefore, may have conveyed queenship and queenly authority, not Hama's personal identity and personal power as a queen. This seal and the clay impressions depict the queen in the company of the king. They date to the reign of Sennacherib and possibly later. None bear inscriptions suggesting the identity of either the king or the queen, although in the case of some sealings, the original lost seal may have had an inscription on it like the one we found on Hamas. In any case, these images are quite poorly preserved, but the king, always in the first position facing the deity, can be identified by his tall headdress. His beard and height further illustrate his rank and possibly his gender. The queen's identity is interpreted based on her position behind the king, as seen to on the inscribed bronze plaque portraying Queen Nakia. The scorpion motif, found on all examples, also implies a queenly presence. Again, her figural appearance is not specifically feminine. Only her beardlessness communicates that she is not male. Atop her head, a short, squarish headdress, sometimes with a cone or point on top of it, signifies her office. Here, I've sorted through the images, comparing line drawings to photographs, and determined that a cone was carved on most, maybe all, of the original seal images. In the case of BM 84671, there, the cone is not visible in the photo or the drawing, but the impression is believed to match this British Museum seal, on which the cone is clearly carved. However, the impression itself is very weak on the upper right corner, so perhaps the details of it didn't transfer to clay. Next, in the case of BM 84789, I believe a cone is discernible in the photo of the impression, though it was not included in the line drawing. The design of the headdresses, however, while consistent across this collection of artifacts, does not match Hamas diadem on the earlier gold stamp seal, nor is it a depiction of the excavated gold floral crown or the mural crown known from larger scale art of this time. I think what we may see here is a version of the king's cone-topped mitre. In this case, it's a queenly headdress type that, to my knowledge, has not yet been formally recognized and discussed. So, the royal couple seals present a category of probably 7th century images of queens in which the queen is recognized by the presence of a scorpion and by her smaller size, beardlessness, position behind the king, and cone-topped headdress. This glyptic type can be added, along with the singular depiction of a queen on Hamas seal, to the 3 larger scale images as securely identified depictions of Neo-Assyrian queens. Casting a wider net, we can consider images of other beardless figures. In large-scale art, it is clear by their weapons and musculature that most beardless figures are eunuchs, not women. Here you can see they are also roughly the same height as the king and the men among whom they stand. Notice, too, on the right, that one of the eunuch figures wears a headband, demonstrating variation in headdresses, presumably according to rank. In these images of eunuchs dating to Ashurbanipal's reign, the figures wear knee-length skirts. We also see that one has shorter hair. In other cases, beardless figures represent captive women and female attendants, and of course the queen. They all lack weapons and musculature. They also wear long skirts, and their hair always reaches their shoulders. In the image of the captives, as well as on the Nakia plaque, the female figures are shorter than the men. But the gender and identity of beardless individuals in the glyptic record, which presents more simplified figures, is more ambiguous. Beardless figures such as these are traditionally interpreted as eunuchs based on a handful of seals that depict a beardless figure with a cuneiform legend naming the owner as a particular eunuch. This is one example, the seal of Nabu Usalu, governor and eunuch of Sargon II. Only on account of the inscription can we infer that the figure is a eunuch. Indeed, neither the beardlessness nor the headband is unique to eunuch iconography. In this case, the headband actually matches a type worn by female attendants on Ashurbanipal's relief, as well as by what is probably a queen depicted on a gold pendant from the queen's tombs at Nimrud. So we see this headband across centuries. Further supporting the generic, non-personal nature of the eunuch figure, this seal depicting a beardless worshiper has two inscriptions. The original inscription names one eunuch. The second explains that the seal was given to another named eunuch. Apparently, this eunuch figure could represent either person. Maybe it's a one-size-fits-all figure. And perhaps these examples of eunuch seals establish a model for our interpretation of beardless figures as generic queens, too, on queen seals. Now I present one more example of a eunuch seal. This one was found in the coffin of Queen Hama. Excavators have suggested that this seal, which names its eunuch owner, may have been gifted to her as an amulet. Though it was not reinscribed in the manner of the previous example, it's tempting to consider that the ambiguity of the beardless figure could have permitted the transfer of the seal from eunuch to queen, with a fluidity in the seal's imagery referring either to queen or to eunuch. I think, however, that this is unlikely, as it could have resulted in chaos among Mark's documents and bullae. Were they authorized by a eunuch or a queen? And what about the many uninscribed seals that depict beardless, unarmed figures, such as these examples excavated from, in, or near burial contexts in Nimrud's Northwest Palace? The excavators, probably inspired by their context and association with the queen's tombs, propose these beardless figures represent queens. But what makes one image that of a queen and another that of a eunuch? The figure on the uninscribed seal might wear an ornament on the upper arm, or right here, you just see a black line. Is that a fissure in the stone? And why would it identify this figure as female when eunuchs in art wear upper armbands? Or maybe this figure was meant to be ambiguous and therefore fluid in its reference to woman or eunuch. If this beardless stock figure is sometimes associated with named eunuchs, though, I'm inclined to believe that it would generally have been recognized as a eunuch. Again, it would presumably have been problematic were the queen or her authority to seal potentially confused with that of a eunuch. This is even more unlikely if we assume that the seal impressions marked the actions of particular individuals who would not in court, in life, have been mixed up, whose spoken voice, physical presence, and regalia would have announced their distinct identities and domains as they applied a seal of authority. Now that we have worked through some logic identifying eunuchs versus women, let's consider two objects that I do think we should take seriously as depictions of queens. First, a carnelian cylinder seal from Queen Hama's coffin. On the seal are two beardless figures. One wears a squarish hat with vertical elements. Could this be a floral crown, a mural crown, probably something else? It also has a dorsal ribbon. The other figure, here, is shorter and positioned behind the king. The figure wears a round cap and a dorsal ribbon. Although I have mentioned height and secondary position behind the king as markers of a queenly figure, here I suggest the shorter figure is a eunuch or an immature crown prince. Because the dorsal ribbon is not depicted on eunuchs, but only on the king, queen, and crown prince, I lean toward identifying him as the crown prince. And I would confidently identify the queen as the taller crown figure who shares with the king access to the sacred tree and direct proximity to the winged disc. The second example of an image of a queen on an 8th century glyptic from Nimrud occurs on a cylinder seal found in an unspecified chamber beneath room 75, near the tombs in the residential area of the palace that the queen likely inhabited. Here, a beardless figure approaches a seated deity. The beardless figure appears to wear a dorsal ribbon, although the line drawing only hesitantly indicates the presence of it. I'm convinced that there is something there, because a second drawing clearly done by another hand and published nearly 20 years earlier, also designates that there's something there, some sort of pendant band. Again, this headgear is not depicted on figures identified as eunuchs. It is consistently worn only by the king, queen, and crown prince. The beardless figure definitely does not depict the king. Likewise, it is unlikely that the crown prince, who, to my knowledge, is never depicted in direct interaction with the deity. Therefore, this beardless figure wearing a dorsal ribbon is probably the queen. On these cylinder seals and Hama's stamp seal, the beardless figure is identified as a queen based on her headdress. The headdress is not even gendered in the case of the diadem with a dorsal ribbon. These figures, then, are identified because they are a queen, not based on any physical characteristics. The headdress, in combination with figural traits, compose the figure of a queen. Reading these three figures as queens, we observe the hitherto under-considered visual evidence for the power and publicity of Neo-Assyrian queens before the Sargonic era. Although we do not know of any large-scale images of queens before the reign of Sennacherib, these miniature glyptic images would have been highly effective in conveying the power of queens through the circulation of their impressions. Indeed, their demonstration of queenship before a deity could be viewed as a summary and legitimation of the office of queenship. The presence of the divine in each not only reinforces the queen's mortal status and dedication to a higher power, but it demonstrates the divine sanctioning and empowerment of her office. This is exemplified by Hama's seal, on which the ring inscription would not have been transferred when stamping its impression. So the seal itself may have been her personal property and marker of her identity, but the image of authority that it circulated was an image of divinely sanctioned queenship. In closing, I'd like to begin to explore the iconography of scenes in which a goddess and queen are depicted facing one another. I propose that the goddess is Ishtar, or an Ishtar-Melissu syncretism. Here, her attributes vary, but probably included, among other things, a sword, a scimitar, a lion. In some images, she holds a beaded ring. Ishtar, in particular, is associated with the beaded ring, which, following the discussion in nearly a century of scholarship, I take as an abbreviated version of the rod and ring, the divine tools of judgment and rule. Now, maybe going off the deep end, I would like to offer the possibility that the ring in Ishtar's hand is the May, the God-given social and cultural norms that included mortal rule. And, well, whatever the ring is, why is Ishtar's ring beaded? Could it reference her astral attribute and/or be an expression of Malamu, divine brilliance? Although the queen, king, and eunuch figures are all depicted in the presence of Ishtar with her beaded ring, it is significant that the queen is among them. That is, the queen, too, was divinely invested with power. Her power did not come from the king, just as the kings did. Her power came directly from the divine. Now, the question of eunuchs receiving divine power is another topic to be investigated, as is the possibility that this iconography in the first millennium is not of investiture. Perhaps the ring was simply an attribute of the great gods, not something necessarily given over to the mortal. But for the purposes of the present argument, focusing on women in the glyptic record, and looking in particular at these three seals from Nimrud, we have images of queens that I propose illustrate divinely sanctioned Neo-Assyrian queenship in the Northwest Palace. This imagery predates the Sargonic period, demonstrating an earlier tradition of the visualization of queenly power as a significant component of royal ideology at Nimrud. Thank you.